You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Let's turn to Congress, where the House just ended a federal government shutdown. A deadline to authorize military action against Iran came and passed. Further afield, a state Senate primary in Indiana has potential ripple effects on redistricting fights across the nation. And with time ticking away before the midterms, both parties are making their cases for the future direction of the country. Here to talk about that and more is Representative Pramila Jayapal. She represents Washington's 7th District in Congress, which includes the majority of Seattle, Burien, and Shoreline. Representative Jayapal, it's always good to have you in studio. Nice to see you.
It's so great to be right here.
Thank you for doing this again. So I want to start with Iran. The U.S. has insisted that its ceasefire still holds, even while just within the last hour, we got news that the U.S. fired on an Iran-flagged tanker that it said was trying to break the blockade. Iran has been striking UAE oil infrastructure. There were U.S. sinkings of small boats in the last week. President Trump announced a new plan to guide boats through the Strait of Hormuz. That was called Project Freedom. Project Freedom lasted about a day. That is now over. The president posted on Truth Social today that the war would be over if Iran, quote, agreed to give what has been agreed to. He also threatened to start bombing again if they do not agree. There's dueling stories from Axios and the Wall Street Journal about some kind of either peace framework or the framework for talks to start again emerging. I guess my question to you is, what do you think the best outcome here might be?
I mean, I think we're going to end up with an outcome that is worse than what we had certainly during the Obama era JCPOA, certainly before this war was started. I mean, both of those things, I think we're further behind because the best outcome is for the United States to immediately pull our troops out, to have the Strait of Hormuz opened again, but probably, it sounds like, with Iran operating as the toll booth operator, and to have no more deaths lost, no more lives lost in Iran, in Lebanon, and, of course, our U.S. troops out of danger. That is a tall order at this point, and it's very difficult to look at any of these reports and understand really what is true and what is not true. Every time Trump goes on Truth Social, we have the Iranian foreign minister or someone from the Iranian government saying this is not true, we haven't agreed to this. It isn't even still clear to us what the original ceasefire agreement had in it. There are differing views on that, differing reports on that. So I think we are in a very grave situation where Trump is also saying that the War Powers Resolution does not apply because or the 60-day limit of the War Powers Resolution does not apply because there has to be a hold for any time that there was a ceasefire. That is not accurate, and the War Powers Resolution is quite clear. The War Powers Act is quite clear that as long as our troops are still in danger, as long as there is still a concerted effort, military effort in the region, which clearly we have, the clock is ticking. So I think at the end of the day, we're going to need Republicans in Congress to step up and say that we now have to take back authorization. We have to withdraw our troops from the region. We have to have a negotiated settlement now with Iran. And I think it's going to be hard, Libby. I don't think that at the end of the day, I think we're going to end up in a much worse place than where we were.
I talked to your colleague in the Washington delegation, Michael Baumgartner, last week about the Iran war, and he speaks in really existential terms about the Iranian regime. And he basically says allowing them to have a nuclear weapon would be a disaster for the region, would be a disaster for the United States, and the high gas prices, the casualties, the damage inflicted on oil infrastructure and the economies worldwide, all of that is a small price to pay, according to him, for an outcome that means Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. Your response to that sentiment?
Well, of course, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That is true. That is why we had the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, that President Obama spent 2 years negotiating to make sure that we could have inspections, regular inspections, to make sure that we could actually have people in the country looking at exactly what Iran was doing. None of that exists because Donald Trump pulled us out of that. And so now, and you remember last year, the first strike on Iran, also unauthorized by the United States under this administration, apparently destroyed all the nuclear weapons. That's what they told us. That is also clearly not the case. So I think what we have to understand is that even if that were the stated goal, both of last year's strike and of this war, we are no closer to that goal. We are actually further away. Second, I would just say it has been argued that it is an existential threat for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and therefore the United States should go to war over and over again through administration after administration. No president has been dumb enough to just go to war with no coalition building, no strategy, no exit plan, and with real threats to American consumers, gas prices, fertilizer prices. All those prices are up, but also to American lives. We've already lost 13 U.S. troops, hundreds injured. Most of those, I think it's over 400 that are reported injured. Most of those have returned to work, but there are some that have serious brain damage as a result of those injuries, and a global economy that is in complete chaos and disarray. So I think, that argument just doesn't hold water, because even if that were the goal, we're no closer to achieving that goal of a nuclear-free Iran.
You mentioned the War Powers Act and this idea that the clock stops on it when there's a ceasefire, which, as you say, isn't in the statute. And there's also a number of Republicans who have said they don't believe that that is part of the law. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski says she's working on a vote to authorize military force, but Majority Leader John Thune has signaled that he's not going to take that up. Democrats in the House have repeatedly tried to get a vote on the War Powers issue. Do you think that a Senate vote has a path? Do you think that there's a path to getting people on the record about this? Is there utility in that vote?
Yes, I think there is utility in getting people on the record. We got very close last time. As you may know, we lost by one vote, just one vote. And so I do think that we could pass this in the House. I have introduced a War Powers resolution. The Progressive Caucus has a strategy of introducing ongoing War Powers resolutions that would be ready to bring to the floor. And so we've been doing that. And I think it's important because the American people don't want this war. And they are very clear about that. If you look at the majority opinion across the board, it is not for this war. They want Donald Trump and Congress and this administration to focus on lowering their gas prices, not driving them up. They want us to focus on making sure they have childcare, on making sure that their energy costs are coming down. Those are the things that we should be focused on. And they see the cost of this in terms of their taxpayer dollars. I mean, we've already spent at least $25 billion on this war. That's a low estimate in my view. And we're continuing to just hemorrhage money on this war that's never been authorized, while we're telling people that we don't have money for their health care or for their, to lower food prices or any of those other things. So I think it's important for people across the country to see where their representative stands and to continue to push Republicans to actually stand up and take back our congressional authority and fight for our constituents instead of for this war.
I want to turn to some more domestic issues. And first up, the partial government shutdown, which ended last week. The House took up the Senate measure that was around for at least a few weeks that included money for DHS, except for ICE and Border Patrol. House Republicans were divided on that bill. There was a conservative faction that refused to vote for it. The White House really broke that impasse, requesting that the House pass the bill, and they, President signed it immediately. Are you satisfied with the outcome of how that all came about? I mean, Democrats held the line. At the same time, the negotiations over ICE and the warrants issue or masking, everything like that, That's still not been resolved. Like, the Democrats have not achieved those policy changes with ICE. How do you think about how this is all played out?
Well, I think it's a big victory for the American people, honestly, because, again, across party line, people did not want to see ICE acting and CBP acting in these lawless, cruel ways where they could just send masked men into the streets to kidnap and kill even U.S. citizens. And so,
but the funding showdown hasn't changed ICE's ability to act, right? Like, the funding showdown itself, they'll use reconciliation. There was money from the big, beautiful bill.
Funding is one of the only pieces of leverage that we have. And I think it is a critical piece because the Republicans used reconciliation last year to pass their big bad betrayal bill. That put an additional $170 billion into ICE and CBP. That's how they have the money to do all these crazy things that they're doing right now. We haven't been able to obviously pull that back yet because we don't have control, but it's got to be something that we look at doing when we take back control. But in the meantime, can you imagine if we had just gone ahead and authorized even more money to go to ICE and CBP? What would that say to communities across this country that have been seeing just outrageous lawless behavior? So I think it is a big win, first of all, that we made it an issue, and it is a public issue, not just one that we're talking about in Congress. Everybody understands what this is. The disapproval of ICE and CBP have shot way up. People don't want us to fund those agencies. Number two, Democrats stuck together in the House and in the Senate to prevent them from actually funding these two agencies. And in the end, we always said we'd fund the rest of DHS. That bill passed unanimously through the Senate on voice vote weeks ago. But it was Republicans who stopped TSA and FEMA and all of the other pieces of DHS from functioning because they were trying to get more ICE and CBP funding. So, yes, we haven't gotten the reforms, but do you think, Libby, that they actually want to do any of those reforms? They don't. They want to continue to mass detain people. They want to continue to send their agents out cruelly into the streets to attack anybody who looks vaguely immigrant or speaks a different language. And so I think we have to see these as steps in the right direction. And people need to see us in Congress standing up for what they know to be absolutely wrong. And I think that they have seen that. Now we're going to have the next fight on reconciliation because they are going to do this on a partisan basis. And I was just looking at the budget reconciliation instructions that came out. There is still $103 billion that remains from the big bad betrayal bill for ICE and CBP. And yet they are asking for another $70 billion to be allocated, including almost 4 times ICE's annual budget. It's almost $40 billion they're asking for ICE on top of more money for CBP. And
that's also where the billion for the ballroom
that's
security,
also where the
is
billion
in there.
for the ballroom security is. And I think what Americans are going to say when they look at this is, wait a second, we just saw our healthcare premiums go up to $20,000, $25,000. You cut Medicaid, you cut the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And now you're telling us you don't have money for that, but you want to put more money into ICE and CBP when they already have still money remaining. I think this is an existential question for a lot of people across the country. Are you going to focus on our healthcare, on our groceries, on our gas prices, on our energy costs? Or are you going to continue to put money into these incredibly unpopular agencies, ICE and CBP? It's a choice.
That kind of brings me to the idea of messaging for Democrats and then looking ahead to the midterm elections. Recent reporting, it's been in the Washington Post, the New York Times, elsewhere, suggests that there is this fight brewing between some progressive Democratic candidates and their supporters and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee over the DCCC's backing of what are seen as more centrist candidates in primaries. The progressives are arguing that DCCC is overly influencing these races. I'm asking you right now to take off your member of Congress hat and talk more about the politics side of this, and we'll put on your Congressional Progressive Caucus PAC hat, if that makes sense. You're a co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus PAC. your group put out a statement this week about a race in California in the 22nd district to that effect, basically saying the DCCC is by backing this other candidate than the one that the progressive PAC has endorsed. I'm going to quote here. You're criticizing that, saying voters, not the DCCC, should pick Democratic nominees. Now, the DCCC is saying basically they look at fundraising, momentum, coalition building, a lot of factors, and they are just trying to win for Democrats. Why do you think they're wrong to put their thumb on the scale?
Well, we've long argued that we should allow competitive primaries to play out, that voters should be able to choose. And that's also a way that we see how good candidates are. Can they generate the momentum and the support that they need in a primary election? And we think primaries are very important because it is about how we connect with the base. And the base, regardless of how mainstream politicians often think about this, the base is very important. We have increasingly lost our base, the Democratic Party has, over the last decade because we don't pay attention to them.
And who's the base? Who do you mean?
The base, I think about young voters. I think about voters of color. I think about very progressive voters, voters who are wanting the Democratic Party to be stronger. And what happens is because a lot of control of Congress ends up resting with, say, swing seats, right, where the theory of change is, for establishment Democrats, the theory is you just go to the most likely voters. And that is a smaller and smaller slice of swing or very conservative Democratic voters.
Like you're trying to win the most likely voters and also maybe pull over some people on the right.
Republican voters.
Yeah.
But you're sort of forsaking the lack of turnout in a Democratic base of young voters and voters of color. And that's
it's persuasion versus like inspiration.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And inspiration is what we really have seen working in places like New York with Mamdani's race, where he turned out a whole group of new voters, but also in many other places across the country where we had young voters, we had voters of color, and then we lost them in the presidential. And so I think we have a different theory of change, which is that we need to energize all parts of our party. And we need to pay particular focus to the people who would likely be Democratic voters if we just paid attention to them, if we spoke to them, if we talked to them like they really matter. And that can work both in blue state elections, in turning out more people for top of the ticket races, but also is important in swing districts where people want populists. They want progressive populists who can channel their anger that they're feeling. So this is a race where it's an extremely competitive primary. And there are two Democratic candidates that are neck and neck. In fact, our candidate has raised more money. The candidate we endorsed, Randy Villegas, encourage everyone to check him out. He's a great he would be the first Latino on the Democratic side to represent that district. He is a great candidate. He has raised the money. He's got tons of union endorsements. He's got Bernie Sanders endorsement. He's got the Progressive Caucus PAC endorsement. He's doing real work with farm workers there to turn out a population that is dramatically impacted by the cuts to Medicaid. It's a very low-income, vulnerable population. And the more we can do to turn out a group of voters who hasn't traditionally been spoken to, the better we will all be for the long-term health of that district. All we're saying is don't get involved in that primary. It is so close and so competitive. Why would you want to put your thumb on the scale? And so we've had a pretty good relationship with the D-Trip. We work closely with the D-Trip and with Hakeem Jeffries. And we usually don't end up in these situations because we have pre-agreed that it is not a good idea to put your thumb on the scale, except in very, very rare circumstances, which typically we talk about well in advance.
Your colleague, Susan Del Bene, is the chair of the DCCC right over there on the east side. Do you ever pick up the phone and give her a call on these issues?
We were in conversation, and actually part of what happened here is they didn't there was a mess up on their side. They did not communicate about this race. Had they communicated, perhaps we wouldn't be in this situation. And so we worked very closely together. We talk all the time. As I said, in most races, we are very aligned and very coordinated. But because this is a very important race to us, and because we didn't have any notice of what was going to happen, and because we think it's the wrong race to weigh into, because it is very competitive. It's not a situation where our candidate is lagging far behind in the polling or in the fundraising or in the endorsements. There's no reason for the D-Trip to get in this race. And so we told them that we were going to put out a statement of this kind, because we're all part of the same team, but we still have to fight for voters to be able to make these decisions in these very competitive primaries.
I guess my question when I see this happening is it does feel very much like 2024 again, where the same arguments are happening about, is it the progressive messaging or like an old school centrist messaging? I don't want to say old school, because there are definitely young new candidates who are seen as more moderate. But it does seem like that battle over the identity of the Democratic Party is still very alive. And will the Democrats resolve these issues? Is this just going to be district by district, or otherwise, how will voters know, what do Democrats stand for?
Well, I think we're very clear about what we stand for. We stand for, affordability is something that we've been fighting for as progressives and populists for a long time. That is now the central message. I feel like we won that battle in the sense of messaging. We have to win it in terms of policy. But I think that for the most part, people know we stand for affordable, quality health care. Of course, I'm pushing for Medicare for all. That is still going to be an ongoing fight. I'm not going to let it up, because I think I'm right. And I think maybe in 10 years, everyone will say, yeah, we should have done that a long time ago. That's, progressives, just first to the best and most just idea. And then everyone runs to catch up with us. So I think voters know, but I do think there is a bent that we have not gotten rid of in terms of how people think we win elections. We still have to fight back on that. We are constantly being told that we are, as progressives or populists, because I want to be clear, you can be a populist progressive and win in a swing district. And you see in the main race what happened, right? The main Senate
Graham Plattner and Janet Mills.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, here's a race where the DSCC, Chuck Schumer and the DSCC, went in, recruited Janet Mills. She was not able to pull it out because Graham Plattner, who is a bold progressive populist, there's lots of things
but
there.
But he's got the Nazi tattoo issue. He issues.
Does, but he went to war. He's talked about it. He's been open about it. And at the end of the day, it's not about what you think about Janet Mills or Graham Plattner. It's about, why did the DSCC go in, try to recruit a candidate who couldn't win, who couldn't even make it to get through the primary.
Who a lot of voters, I think, saw a Biden issue there too with age.
Ran out of money, age, not channeling the anger of the base. So, look, it's going to be, I don't want to overplay it, because I think we're very coordinated. We work very closely with the D-Trip on 95% of races. But in the 5% where we have a challenge, we're not going to hesitate to step up and say that. We're going to try to do everything we can ahead of time to prevent those situations, because we are on the same team. And we do believe that our affordability message, our message that voters deserve a real life where they can thrive and not just barely survive, and that this administration is doing everything possible to destroy that future, Democrats will stand up and fight for voters. That message we're very clear on, and we're not backing off of that.
1 minute left. I know this is what they call district work period, aka Congress is in recess right now. What do you have going on that people should know about? And what are your things you have cooking that you want people to hear about?
Yeah. Well, I just love being home. First of all, okay, 1 minute. So we did some amazing stuff on climate. We had a great climate town hall yesterday with over 100 people, and it was just so full of energy, talking about the kinds of things that we can do to really take on climate change and continue to roll back this administration's deregulatory efforts. We had a great briefing on Cuba. I'm continuing to work to make sure we don't go to war with Cuba, and this is really important to me. We are also pushing forward on a whole bunch of projects around just, how do we make sure that healthcare is affordable? How do we make sure that we're taking on foreign wars? Those are the things that our district cares so much about. And it's always great to be home and to see the passion and the support that people have for a member of Congress who is, yes, on the front lines of many of these battles, but making sure that we stand up and fight for what we deserve.
I wonder if district work period will ever catch on versus recess, because I know members of Congress are very frustrated by that
so
phrasing.
Frustrated. It makes it sound like we're sitting on the couch and eating bonbons, and I'm never busier than when I'm home.
Recess. Sounds great. Representative Pramila Jayapal, 7th District, includes majority of Seattle, Burien, Shoreline. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.